Hi everyone. So this is the summary of 2.5 and 2.6 in your book. I have previously made a video about 2.1 till 2.4. I hope you still have it somewhere. If not, look it up in Magister when I send it to you in December, I think. So this is 2.5, the parts of blood. So 2.5 is all about whatever is inside your blood, what your blood is made of. And the first slide talks about the job of blood. It says the job of, or the function of circulatory systems, but really you know that the circulatory system contains blood. And here you see a list of all the things that blood actually does. Well, most of the things that blood does. So oxygen goes from your lungs to your cells, obviously, and carbon dioxide, which is a waste product that is made by your cells, needs to be transported back to your lungs so you can breathe it out. And blood, of course, is the one that transports that. Blood also transports other things like nutrients from your intestines. So if you've eaten, then there are nutrients in your intestines, voedingsstoffen. And those nutrients need to be transported to your cells, so your cells can make energy and make all kinds of other products from it. And your blood transports the nutrients to the cells, but your cells then make waste. One of the waste types is carbon dioxide, which of course goes to the lungs, as we've talked about before. But there's other types of waste, and this is transported to your kidneys because this other waste cannot be breathed out. It has to be peed out, so it has to be turned into urine, by your kidneys so you can pee it out. And of course, the last job of your blood is to keep you warm everywhere in your body. So that means it works like an air conditioning system where blood is transporting warmth from one area of your body to the other area, or if you're too warm, your blood transports the extra heat to the surface of your body so that you can sweat and remove this extra heat. Now, besides these things on the list, your blood also protects you against disease. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about the white blood cells. So on the next slide, you see a tube of blood. And when you look at it, it looks like one big same old same thing. It just looks like red substance. However, this red substance actually consists of all kinds of different parts. And there's two ways that you can find this out. One way is to leave the tube on a desk, and then you can see the second picture on the left. Or you can look at blood under the microscope, in which case you will see all the cells, which you can see in the right upper corner of the slide. Now, if you look back on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the second tube, and that blood actually consists of two things, and that is plasma and cells, blood cells. Now, if you look at the tube, you can see actually three parts. The three parts are plasma, white blood cells and platelets, and then the red blood cells. Now, the red blood cells are at the bottom because they're heavy, and there are many, and so they sink to the lower area of the tube. Not entirely to the bottom because there are just so many of them, so they kind of stack up to the lower part of the tube. And then in the middle area, the orange area, you can see the white blood cells and the platelets, which are small amounts, and they are a little bit lighter than the red blood cells, which is why they're there. And then plasma is the lightest part, and it is a bright kind of yellowish liquid. Now, this plasma is made up of water, mostly water, but besides water, it contains four things. You can see that in the slide. It's nutrients, waste substances, hormones, and a small amount of oxygen. It is really important that you remember it's only a very small amount of this oxygen. So if you need to write down what is inside plasma, you write down these 4 parts, and of course, water. So remember the previous slide talked about how blood is transporting things. Well, it was transporting nutrients, it was transporting waste, hormones, oxygen, it's all in that plasma. But remember, the amount of oxygen in plasma is very small. So we go to the cells, and there's 3 types: red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets. And remember, platelets are not really cells, but they are parts of red blood cells that have died. And these platelets then have a second life and a second totally different type of job, which we will talk about in another slide. Now, these red blood cells, these white blood cells, and these platelets each have their own very specific job, and they're all made in the bone marrow, so in your bones. So the red blood cells have a very special job. Their job is to transport oxygen. Now remember, I told you that plasma contains a small amount of oxygen. Red blood cells contain almost all oxygen, really, that your blood transports. And the way red blood cells transport oxygen is through a substance they have inside of them called hemoglobin. And they have so much hemoglobin inside of them that they have no room for a nucleus. That's very, very irregular for blood cells, or actually for cells in general. So no nucleus, because they need so much hemoglobin, because they really need all the hemoglobin they can get in order to bind oxygen so that they can transport it. So there's a problem with some people that have less hemoglobin. And there's 2 ways you can have less hemoglobin. By the way, having less hemoglobin is called anemia, bloedarmoede, anemia. So the first type of anemia, your cells, your red blood cells, let me just draw that for you a little bit. So your red blood cells have less carbon dioxide, well, less hemoglobin in them. So there's not enough hemoglobin inside the red blood cells. That means they can bind less oxygen, and so they can transport less oxygen to your cells, and your cells can make less energy with that through respiration. The way to medicate that is to give iron to the patient, and then he will make lots of hemoglobin again, which means he can make and transport lots of oxygen to your cells, and the person is healed. Now, the second type of anemia is a very strange one, and that's called sickle cell anemia. Now, instead of having round red blood cells, your red blood cells will have this shape. Now, look at the weird shape of them. They are called sickles. So the red blood cells are kind of like, you know how the moon can sometimes be kind of small, like a sickle. They call it a sickle. Well, that is the shape of these red blood cells. They look like half moons, or even smaller than half moons. Now, people that have this obviously have less hemoglobin in their cells, because the cells are so weird and small in their red blood cells, so they cannot have enough oxygen in them to transport, and of course they also have anemia, but this type of anemia is called sickle cell anemia. If you give these patients iron, it will not help one bit, because they just don't have the room to make more hemoglobin. In fact, these patients have a big problem, because sickle cell anemia is a hereditary disease. This means that they have inherited it in their DNA, and their bone marrow will keep making these sickle cell red blood cells, these weird shaped red blood cells. It's a real problem for some people. So just to make sure you understand this, sickle cell anemia and regular anemia. If you do not understand, rewind and listen to this story again. So we can continue to the white blood cells. Now, white blood cells have a totally different job. Their job is to defend you against disease. So they will do this in two different ways. Either they will do that as phagocytes. Now, phagocytes can stretch themselves and swallow up bacteria, like you see in this picture over here. Or they can make antibodies, and then they're called lymphocytes. And the antibodies, well, think of them as weapons. Here you can see those antibodies. Now, the lymphocytes have a memory. The memory is that they can remember which weapon works for which invader. An invader could be a bacteria, a virus, a fungus, a parasite, you name it. It could be many thousands of them. Now, it turns out that every invader type needs a different weapon type. Now, the first time ever your body comes in contact with a new invader it has never seen before, it will have to figure out which antibody works, and then it will have to make the antibody, and then it will be able to destroy the invader. And during all of this time, you are sick. Fortunately, you get better as soon as your body remembers or finds out which weapon to make and produce against this invader. But the second time ever in your life you get sick again with the same invader, your body now has a memory. Your lymphocytes know exactly which antibody to use against this particular invader, and this is called immunity. And you are immune. So immunity means that your body knows which antibody to produce, which weapon to produce against the invader. Now on your test, please never say weapon, say the actual word antibody. But just in your head, figure it out and remember it in a way that you know it's kind of like a weapon. So, the platelets, again, a totally different job. They are there for blood clotting, bloedstolsels maken. They cannot normally do this in your body. It's not allowed. If they would make blood clots all the time, then your blood vessels would always be clogged and blocked everywhere, and your organs would not receive blood, no oxygen, no energy, and that would be very, very, very bad for that organ. So normally there's no blood clots anywhere in your body. Sometimes there could be blood clots in your body, but that is called atherosclerosis. Remember from a previous paragraph in the other video, atherosclerosis means that there are plaques inside your blood vessels which cause blood clots. And if this happens in your coronary arteries, so the arteries around your heart muscle, then of course you're going to get a heart attack. And when a blood clot forms in your brain, it's called a stroke. But what kind of blood clotting are we talking about here? Here we are talking about blood clotting when you have a wound. So the actual types of blood clotting that are actually good and positive. So how does this work? Well, you have a substance in your blood called fibrinogen, which is a harmless substance. It does not clot anything, but when it gets in contact with a wound and when it gets a signal from platelets, this fibrinogen will turn into fibrin. Now look in your notes because we made a drawing about this. Now fibrin is threads, and threads, draadjes dus, threads can make a net, and this network catches all of the blood that wants to stream out of your blood vessel. So it will catch red blood cells, it will catch white blood cells, it will catch platelets, it will catch the bacteria that want to come into your blood vessels, so it also prevents infections to come in, and that is a very good thing. So this clot is called a scab when it is on the outside of your skin. But it will be called a clot when it is under your skin. So on the next slide, you see the same process again. You see the wound, you see the red blood cells, the yellow things are the platelets. They give a signal to fibrinogen, it turns into fibrin, and it catches all of these materials, and prevents the materials from streaming out of your body and prevents invaders to come into your body. Now, the clot under your skin is sometimes called a blue mark or a blue spot. Now, remember this process very well. You need to be able to explain this on your test. You need to just repeat what I just said. Fibrinogen turns into fibrin with the signal from the platelets, and it turns into this fibrin net that will catch blood from streaming out and prevent bacteria from streaming in. Okay, so if you cannot do this process, you have a disease called hemophilia, which is an inherited disease. And this is not very nice, because if you have a wound, which means a ruptured blood vessel, and this blood vessel needs to be repaired, blood will not be prevented to clot, and it will keep on streaming out, and this will cause infections and all kinds of hardship for a patient. Luckily today we have a medicine, but in your book there is an extension box which you can read, and it talks about the family of Queen Victoria, and apparently her offspring was people that became princes and princesses and queens and kings in Europe, and one of those families was the Russian Tsar, and his little boy Alexei had hemophilia. And he was not the only one, because many other members of Queen Victoria's family had hemophilia, and this is why hemophilia is called the royal disease. Anyway, so luckily today we have a medicine. This is it. I hope it worked for you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Good luck with learning, and I'll see you soon. Bye.